Hello. This is John, of course, from John in Theory, and this week I want to talk about Marvel movies. Marvel movies have been on my mind today, more than I guess I have in a while. I don't know why, because I haven't seen a Marvel movie in a little while, but that's fine. Specifically, I think it's kind of crazy the way Loki's arc in the MCU happens. I don't think it makes any sense. So, okay, refresher. If you've forgotten everything about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you've forgotten everything about Loki. Loki is, of course, one of the main villains. You know, he shows up in the first Thor movie. He's the main antagonist of Avengers, the film of 2012. You may have seen it. And he pops up in several other movies after the Avengers. And here's my question. First Thor, he's a bad guy. He does a couple of bad things, but, he doesn't do anything that bad. I mean, I haven't seen Thor in a while, the first one, but from what I recall, the first Thor, he betrays some people, he sneaks around, causes some problems. Like, nobody dies, I think. But in Avengers, like, a lot of people die. Like, Loki causes the deaths of thousands of people. If you recall, his plan is to incite an alien invasion that would have killed everybody. So he would have basically genocided planet Earth. And you know what? That's his prerogative. He's the god of mischief. Humans are nothing to him. So their lives don't matter to him. And, like, that's super evil. Like, one of the complaints about the Marvel movies that I consider, pretty valid is that none of these movies really do any deep exploration of evil. People will usually say, you know what, the Marvel movies, they have a villain problem. I hear that all the time. Big villain problem, the Marvel movies they've got. And I guess that's true. Most of the Marvel villains, they kind of pop up, they do evil stuff, then they leave, or they usually die. And there's usually like a scene early on that shows like, wow, that guy is evil. Good example, Yellow Jacket in Ant-Man 2015. Yellow Jacket, he shows up, and the first thing that he does that's evil is he uses this like gun and to shrink somebody, but it doesn't shrink the guy, it turns him into goo. It's gross. And I was like, yeah, that guy's evil. I don't root for him. But then people still say, Marvel has a villain problem because that Marvel villain is not very interesting. But you know who is interesting? They say Loki. And people like Loki for a lot of different reasons. He's charismatic, played by Tom Hiddleston. You really get something out of that performance. You get some tingles. One thing that I like about him is that he's the inverse of Thor. Thor is this big tough guy, this guy who was born to be a leader. Royalty. Loki, he does a different thing. He's not like Thor, but evil. Most of the Marvel villains you'll see are like an evil version of the heroes. So Iron Man, who's the villain in that movie? A bigger Iron Man. That's his big villain. And then of course, Spider-Man. The Vulture is kind of like, I don't know. Actually, that's not a good example. Black Panther, that's a better example. Killmonger, great character, but he also uses a vibranium suit. So like their power sets are usually like parallel. Happens in a lot of Marvel movies. Yellow Jacket, as I mentioned, also shrinks. But what's cool about Loki is that he is the opposite of Thor. So they don't really fight. I mean, they do here and there, but they don't. There's no, like, big climactic battle between them. It's a battle of wits. And, Thor always loses these battles up until Thor Ragnarok. That said, back to my original point. Yes, Loki is an interesting character. He's been successful in these Marvel movies as somebody who keeps returning because people like him. But his arc doesn't make any sense. His role in the MCU is very weird. And I'm not saying it makes the movies bad, and I'm not saying it makes the character bad. But I do think it's kind of weird that we gloss over it, and the movies gloss over it. Nobody ever mentions this. Because by the time we get to Thor Ragnarok, Loki, this character who has killed thousands of people, who is responsible for so much mayhem and turmoil. A real villain. He never really reckons with the bad things that he's done. In Thor the Dark World, if you remember, and you should, Loki's in jail. And, that's not okay, a murder, life in prison, arguable. But he gets out of jail eventually. And, he's brought out of jail by Thor's doing. And, the one time that he has to pay for his mistakes is when Natalie Portman's character, Jane, remember that, she slaps him. And she's like, that was for New York. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, wow, deserves way harsher treatment, in my opinion, because, again, and I have to keep reiterating, murder. And then after Thor the Dark World, we get to Thor Ragnarok. That's Loki's next appearance. And all of a sudden, it's played for laughs that he's Loki. It's no longer taken seriously that this guy is a mass murderer, which I find pretty weird. And I love Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok is my second favorite Marvel movie. My first favorite Marvel movie is Guardians of the Galaxy. The reason I like those two movies, probably, basically the most out of the Marvel films, is because they don't take themselves seriously. They kind of lean into the fact that they don't go serious. My main issue with movies like Doctor Strange, were just that very self-serious, but also quippy and jokey, and I don't know, it's never been a formula that I think is all that interesting. But I like the movies fine. I do think that they're good movies. I don't think there are a lot of bad Marvel movies. I do think, though, that Loki's arc is bad and forgetful, and it kind of takes advantage of the fact that people forget about a lot of stuff that happens in these movies. That's because a lot of people, they watch Avengers, but I think people forget how evil what Loki was doing, because we spend a lot of time with Loki and the helicarrier, and also kills Coulson. We forgot to mention that. I brought this up, by the way. The whole thing with, in Thor Ragnarok, he's like the comic relief. He's on Thor's team. At the end of that movie, he and Thor are side by side. And I'm like, what? What? You think the Incredible Hulk is cool with this? You think Bruce Banner is looking at this situation objectively and is thinking to himself, yeah, this is a good call? I don't know. It's something that really pesters me because, I don't know. I get it's a comic book movie. I get he's a villain. Yeah, he mass murdered, but you're supposed to forget about all that. Stuff's happened. It's been 8 years, we know, thanks to Spider-Man Homecoming. But it still bothers me. And I do think that Marvel could overcome its villain problem if it did take its villains a little bit more seriously. If even the villains that they redeem ultimately didn't just come around the drop of a hat. This isn't a CW show. If you watch any program on the CW, not just the superhero ones, but especially the superhero ones, and then that MTV show Teen Wolf did this a lot. Characters that were villains in the first season, they become recurring characters in the second season. And then the villain of that season becomes a hero in the next season. They do this thing all the time where a character will start out as a villain. You'll have the vampire from Vampire Diaries, played by Ian Somerhalder. Damon, that's his name. And he's the villain. He's the guy you don't care. You're like, man, Damon, he's cool. It's cool to be bad, but I don't want him to win. By the end of the series, he's the main character. He's the protagonist. These shows do it all the time. Dragon Ball Z. Dragon Ball Z did this all the time. And I always really appreciated, actually, how Dragon Ball Z redeems some of its main villains. And I can't believe I'm talking about Dragon Ball Z at all. And Dragon Ball Super by extension. So spoilers for Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. But the main villain of Dragon Ball is Piccolo. Piccolo is the green character, the Namekian. He is super bad. Super bad dude, does terrible things. He isn't redeemed immediately in Dragon Ball Z. There is a compelling arc. He saves the world, but not just that. He trains the son of Goku. I I would say that Dragon Ball Z kind of popularized our modern, the villain trains the young son of the hero kind of archetype that we see in a lot of movies nowadays and shows and everything like that. We see it like, another good example is probably Boruto. The way that Sasuke, from the Naruto series comes along. Spoilers for Boruto. Sasuke, he starts to train Naruto's son. And we see this too. One of the worst, most evil characters in Dragon Ball Z is Vegeta. Vegeta, he murders. Like, he does really bad stuff. And in a way, the show doesn't really get to that. But, like, at least, like, Vegeta dies. Like, he dies, he gets brought back to life, and then he starts helping the good guys. And the people that he does kill, or has a hand in killing, do get brought back to life. So none of the damage he does is, like, permanent. So I can buy Vegeta in this situation. I can buy Android 18. She becomes a good person. I can buy Majin Buu. He becomes good as well. Redeeming villains is so popular, and it can be very useful in telling compelling stories. But Loki from the MCU, it's a half-hearted redemption because he's never fully redeemed. He never goes on a painful, emotionally traumatic arc. He just sort of like tricks Thor a lot. They help each other because they have common goals. And then they just sort of start helping each other for the heck of it. It's kind of like in Walking Dead. Have you ever noticed in that show, like, characters, they won't trust each other? Rick Grimes, he'll be like, you can't be in our group. You're a bad person. We don't trust you. But then they'll go through like some event where they have to kill some zombies together. And that person proves to Rick Grimes that they can be trusted because they could have killed him, that they didn't. Like, even that would have been kind of, like if there was some sort of logic to it. But instead, Loki, there's no logic to where he's at. By the time we get to Infinity War, this is a guy who, the movies do recognize he's still a bad guy. Thor doesn't trust him, but he never pays for his crimes fully. He never, like, has to confront the bad things that he's done and will probably continue to do. He just keeps doing bad things. And I think part of the reason that's happening, it's twofold. I already mentioned before, it's because he's a popular villain. They're not going to turn him into a hero because he's a great villain in the comics and people like him as a villain. But at the same time, I think that they are sort of saving him to be an antagonist. They're trying to still keep him in antagonist mode for a future movie or something. But I honestly think Infinity War is going to be it for him. That's basically all I've got on this. I think that, we were speculating today on Twitter about, like, what's going to happen to him in the end. Is he going to, like, sacrifice himself? I don't know. I don't super care. I don't care as long as, like, there is something to him that, like, sums up his MCU journey in a way that if it can, like, self-correct, be a little, if it can be a little self-aware, I think that would be great. I would love a self-aware Thor resolution to that character because I don't expect we're going to get really any more Thor movies, and if we do, they're going to be drastically different, and I think for the better. But that's what I think about Loki. Let me know if you agree, disagree, or neither. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy Infinity War. I am looking forward to it.